to be doing our presentation on Daisey Bates. And I'll tell you a little bit about the history of Daisey Bates, and then the thing we want to highlight is our Remembering Daisey Bates orator at the March on Washington.
Keep going, stay there.
Okay, so I can, I met Daisey Bates when I was 10 years old, when I moved to Little Rock, Arkansas to stay with my dad and my family there. They live right across the street, and we were the only the second family we were the first family with children on the block. Everybody were professionals and nobody had children, but they kind of we adopted them as our family. They joined us in holidays and things like that. But Daisey Bates was married to L.C. Bates. L.C. Bates and Daisey Bates kind of took on my sister Linda and I, my younger sister, kind of made us their adopted godchildren. So spent a lot of time with her and growing up with her, and also Linda, my sister Linda, and Mrs. Bates loved children, and as you will find out about it, I don't know if it's mentioned in the article that Bethany's going to be very clip. But anyway, we want that Bethany read about her part in March on Washington. I remember Ms. Bates telling me that people didn't even remember her speaking because she came up after Dr. Martin Luther King, and everybody was all fired up after his speech. Nobody heard a word that she said. She said her speech was obsolete. And she wanted to take my sister and I to the March on Washington. I was 13 years old, but my bonus mom thought it was going to be riots and stuff, so she wouldn't let us go. But she always wanted us to be a part of history making. She wanted us to meet famous people and all that. So I'll let Bethany read about her, and then I'll end up getting more about it at the end. After Bethany reads, there's going to be a short couple-minute clip.
Today marks the 56th anniversary of the March on Washington, the historic 1963 protest in which as many as 500,000 people marched to demand jobs and freedom for Americans of all racial backgrounds. Though many of us remember this as the day that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his iconic I Have a Dream speech, it is easy to forget that he was not the only civil rights leader to address the crowd. One of the leaders who joined him was movement veteran Daisey Bates, the only woman permitted to speak, though not in her own words. After being introduced by March organizer Bayard Rustin, Bates delivered the 142-word tribute to women. Though her statement was brief and prepared for her by a male staffer, existing writings on Bates' life suggest that she was seldom at a loss for words. As biographer Griff Stockley observed in Daisey Bates, Civil Rights Crusader, Bates confounds the expectations of those of both races who prefer their heroines modest. She was criticized as being pushy, ambitious, and aggressive, those qualities for which men in leadership roles were praised. But as we view Bates' life in retrospect, we can see that it was precisely these qualities that allowed her to have a significant impact on her community and the country at large. In collaboration with husband J.C. Bates, Daisey Bates launched the Arkansas State Press, a voice for the African American community in Arkansas and a platform to cover the underreported racial terror sweeping in her region. The journalistic leadership positioned her to become president of the Arkansas chapter of the NAACP in 1952 and play a central role in the metaphorical earthquake that would soon shake Little Rock and the rest of the country. After being highly visible with Arkansas's black community for years, Bates entered the awareness of Arkansans in 1956 when an act of defiance landed her on the front page of the largest statewide newspaper. During pretrial proceedings for Aaron V. Cooper, the Supreme Court case that would set the stage for the integration of Little Rock Central High School. The school board's lawyers sought to invalidate local NAACP leaders' bid for justice. Among their lawyers was a highly respected Leon Catlett, who repeatedly referred to Bates using her first name. This was a widely used strategy employed by whites to reinforce the notion that black people were childlike and unworthy of respect. But Bates had the audacity to correct him publicly. She said, "You addressed me several times this morning by my first name. That is something that's reserved for my intimate friends and my husband. You refrain from calling me Daisy." When Catlett retorted that he wouldn't call her anything then, her response was, "That'll be fine." A black woman publicly challenging such acts of subjugation in the Jim Crow South was so remarkable that it was newsworthy, and it sent ripples across Arkansas. As biographer Stockley explains, following Bates' brave choice, blacks in Little Rock and through Arkansas knew they had a leader who dared to confront whites face to face as an equal. And by the same token, Little Rock whites knew their enemy was not just in New York office of the NAACP or in the pages of the Arkansas State Press. As tensions mounted, Bates became the sole mentor and spokeswoman for the Little Rock Nine, the 9 black students selected to integrate Central High School, admit physical threats from the National Guard and mobs of white segregationists. And while offering her home as a daily meeting place for the 9, Bates endured a deluge of threats and nightly attacks that included cross burnings, gunfire, and other violent acts. As Bates' role in desegregation became more visible, major advertisers pulled out of her newspaper and the operation folded. Despite this loss, she remained a fierce champion of civil rights and educational equity, and would resuscitate the newspaper after her husband died years later. Given Bates' marked contributions to civil rights and demonstrated knack for articulate dissent, America lost an important opportunity when she was not permitted to speak in her own words at the March on Washington. What she would have said and what it would be like if we could look back to that day, remember her words. In addition to King's moving oratory, Bates' story calls to mind the scores of movement leaders whose contributions were immeasurable, but who were never permitted to become the face of the movement, be it for their gender, their sexual orientation, or for other reasons that threatened the credibility of the movement in the eyes of other leaders. As social change work continues around race, gender, and other dimensions of identity, Bates' unapologetic spirit of resistance remains an inspiration, and her legacy speaks for itself.
We'll watch.
Motivated by the violence of her own mother's rape and murder, and determined to make a change in the way America viewed race, Daisey Gatson Bates became a revolutionary civil rights activist and leader, making a significant difference in our state. Daisey grew up in the small town of Huttig, Arkansas. She was adopted by Oralee and Susie Smith when she was just 7 years old, after her mother's rape and murder by 3 men. Those men were never prosecuted, and this sparked a fire in Daisey that filled her with hate. Her father gave her some advice that would later encourage her to be a leader for change. He said, "Hate can destroy you, Daisey. If you hate, make it count for something. Try to do something about it, or your hate won't spell a thing." Her first chance to do something was in 1941, when she and her husband, Elsie Bates, started their own newspaper called the Arkansas State Press. The paper centered around equal rights for all and became a voice for the African American community. Her influence on the equal rights movement earned her the title of president of the NAACP in 1952. It was during that time that Daisey put her focus on fighting for the same quality of education for all races.
Daisey Bates!
When the desegregation crisis of Central High School occurred in 1957, Daisey's dedication to education made her the driving force behind the cause. She guided and advised the 9 students chosen to attend the all-white high school. She used her home as the meeting place for the Little Rock Nine, planning and implementing how desegregation would be carried out. She became president of the parent-teacher organization even though she did not have a child enrolled at the school. She knew she was an advocate for those 9 students, and she knew that her fight was not just for them, but for the entire African American race. Even though her home was often a target for those who were against desegregation, she never lost sight of her dream for equality, making her a pivotal figure in the civil rights movement and a fearless heroine of our state.
Thank you, Ms. Sheila. So as you can see from the video clip, that Mrs. Bates was instrumental in with the Little Rock 9 integrating Central High School, the largest high school in Arkansas. And the Little Rock 9 were the first blacks to enter that school, and probably heard all the stories about things that happened to them while they were there. Most of them, all of them, basically went on to be successful. Mrs. Bates did restart the Arkansas State Press, and I think it was 1985 when she started it back up. She was just determined to start it back up. As you can see, remember from the clip, the ad stopped and the paper folded after the Central High crisis, Little Rock 9 and the Central High crisis. So, but she, with the help of friends, was able to regenerate that paper. And Sheila had the opportunity to do a weekly article. The paper was a weekly paper. She had the opportunity while she was a senior in high school to do a column for the paper, and it was called Teen Talk. And it was highly praised by Bill Clinton, who was governor at the time. He said he couldn't wait each week to read her article. But Daisey Bates believed in education, and she always stressed that with us and tried to, like I said, involve us in anything important that was going on. She always had, when people would come to Little Rock, people like Dr. Martin Luther King, Thurgood Martin. I never met Dr. Martin Luther King, but I did meet. I probably would have if he hadn't gotten assassinated, because I was 13 when he got assassinated. But I did get to meet like Thurgood Marshall, Roy Wilkins, Thornton was her attorney, but so many. And I had the opportunity to travel with Mrs. Bates after when Sheila was in high school. After she went on to college, she had gotten to the position where she needed somebody to travel with a lot. So I was really blessed to be able to travel and meet people and just be exposed to all kind of history. So Daisey Bates was like I said, like was a mother. I lived with her. I moved in with her. Sheila and I, when Sheila was 12th grade, I was living in an apartment, and by that time I was divorced, and she said, you need to stop struggling. You know, she was trying to graduate, come on, move in with me. So Sheila said I became her beautician, her chauffeur, her cook, her maid, everything. But I also worked at the Arkansas State Press. She ran an ad in the paper for me in exchange for working there, putting in some hours there. But if you remember from my mom's birthday celebration, I told you about the jobs I had. Well, that was one of my real jobs where I got like $7 a week. Which was, you know, the jobs were like a quarter, washing dishes and all that, but that was a job for me. And they would save my money, you know, like during the summer, they wouldn't pay me, they would save it, and then take me to buy my school clothes or whatever I needed. But it was just a joy growing up with her, and like I said, basically grew up in her house, being right across the street from her. So that's a little bit about Daisey Bates. You saw in the video that how her front window was taped up, and they put the wrought iron bars on there, and it stayed for years as a reminder, you know, of what went on, what people did. And she saved the rock that they actually threw in her window and broke the window. Their house is now a historic site. So if you go to Little Rock, they kind of took it back to what made it look like what it looked like in 1957. So it's really nice. But I know that house from top to bottom because, like I said, I had to clean it. And whenever there was a form of dinner the night before, and you wonder how I get a lot of my etiquette from, we had to go and set the table the night before when somebody was going to come into town, or guests, because they all stayed back then. They didn't stay at hotels. No blacks weren't allowed in hotels, and so they would stay with her. They had a guest room, so they would stay with the Bates. And Sheila and I slept in the room where people like Dr. Martin Luther King, Thurgood Marshall, and all slept in that guest room. But again, we hope you've enjoyed our little bit about Daisey Bates. Daisy Lee Gatson Bates. Amen.